Tonight, the DNA company Ancestry.com has tightened its rules for law enforcement. Our Lynn Kawano explains how that could affect cold cases in Hawaii.
DNA databases are necessary to the technology that has helped solve murders, freed the wrongfully convicted, and identified human remains. 19-year-old Nancy Anderson was stabbed to death in 1972 in her Waikiki apartment. Genetic genealogy testing identified her alleged killer nearly 50 years later. The 78-year-old died at the Oahu Community Correctional Center in 2023, awaiting trial.
We waited a lifetime to get an answer, and these genetic genealogists, they're finding these horrendous people, these people that have, serial killers and people that have committed violent crimes against society and against families like ours.
But one of the biggest DNA databases, Ancestry, recently revised its terms and conditions, making it clear that law enforcement cannot access its records without a court order.
We as a society need to support them, give them the tools. They're not only finding violent criminals, but they're helping to find people that have been convicted wrongly and are truly innocent.
This same technology helped find the suspect in the Dana Ireland rape and murder in 1991. Genetic genealogy DNA identified Albert Laurel Jr. as the sole contributor of the DNA from the Big Island crime. 3 men were convicted 25 years ago, even though their DNA was not found in any of the evidence at the crime scene or on the victim.
Had it not been for genetic genealogy and accessing private DNA databases, we never would have found him.
At some point when the case has gone completely cold, they're not looking for the defendant, they're looking to try to find somebody that is related to the DNA sample that they have. And then that only points them in the right direction.
Here's how the technology works. A DNA sample left behind at a crime scene is loaded onto a database which identifies distant relatives. That provides a family tree for the genetic expert to follow. Looking at age, sex, other physical traits, and location, they determine who could have committed the crime.
There's a debate even amongst us, those that do innocence work and cold case work, about whether genetic genealogy is ethical and whether or not it should be used.
While the change at Ancestry could be a roadblock, there are still other public databases that can be used. I'm Lynn Kawano, Hawaii News Now.